Now, it's the annual classic Yass weekend, and the house known as Old Linton is one of the undoubted highlights. It was built in 1857 as a private home for the legendary sheep baron A.B. Triggs. After his death, Linton was sold and became a war veterans' home. It's now back in private hands. It's got 46 rooms, including a ballroom, but most of all, it has a history, and it's open this Sunday. Chris Kimball had a sneak preview.
It is certainly a story that's slipped away. I'm sure a lot of people who are new to the region come past here and they think, what is that? Why such a grand place? I think a lot of people have sort of forgotten or just don't know of its background. But Triggs especially was one of Australia's greatest pastoralists. Everyone talks about Sydney Kidman, who was a friend of Triggs. In the industry of the wool industry, people who know about Triggs, he's basically the Sydney Kidman of the wool industry. So yeah, he was the sheep king. And you've got to think about Yass, you know, this is where, if we rode on the sheep's back in Australia, this is where we rode it. The captains of that industry were here. So there are many fine mansions in this part of the world.
Your family connection to this house goes back many, many years, and you first came through that front door. How did you first come through that front door?
I was in my bassinet and Dad carried me in. So that would be just on 90 years ago, nearly 90 years ago. And I've been here lots since. We used to come when the Triggs family were here. And then when it became a war veterans' home, we used to come with the Red Cross to do the mending for them all. And my mother was here, and she was rather austere. And she was one of the dear old boys came along and said, "Mrs, would you mend my trousers for me?" She said, "Yes, of course." "Just a minute," he said, "I'll be back." So he went away. Mum thought to get the trousers, came back in a dressing gown, handed the trousers to Mum, and they were still warm. Mother wasn't terribly impressed because they needed buttons on the fly. She was less impressed then, I think. We had lots of fun here. They had when we were old enough to go and dress up in long dresses and things, they had a Christmas night party. And we all came thinking, you know, I was about 17, I suppose, and thought I was Christmas. We dressed up and looking as glamorous as we possibly could. And then they played mad games, like eat a Sao biscuit and run to the other end of the lawn, outside we were, and whistle a song, and your partner had to recognise it. All they got was an earful of Sao biscuit.
Sounds like a pretty good party.
They were great fun, great fun.
It must have been a focus or a focal point for social life for much of this community in those days.
I can imagine. I mean, I used to manage the National Trust property of Cooma Cottage, and you hear stories, and one of the stories you hear about is Linton, you know. And Hamilton Hume, the owner of Cooma Cottage, was a very famous Australian explorer, but in terms of the social life, you don't hear much about the Hume side of it. You certainly hear a lot about the amazing world of A.B. Triggs.
So this house, as well as being a piece of history, had quite a famous collection within it of all variety of paintings and art and artefacts.
The collection was amazing. It's just scary to conceive. It was so eclectic. If you imagine, what's the chap's name, Walsh, who started Mona down in Tasmania, or even the John Paul Getty Museum, it's as eclectic as that. Artworks that were in this property in Old Linton they're now in national collections around the world. I saw one just the other day in the New South Wales Gallery, and I know they're in the National Gallery of Britain, the Metropolitan in New York. It's mind-boggling to think this little old town harboured such a collection.
So the Triggs collection in today's monetary terms, would you...
I'll give you an idea. The said medieval illuminated book sold probably 20 or 30 years ago for $500,000. That's just one item. This collection was worldwide known.
So it was literally a treasure trove in this old homestead.
Yeah.
How do you describe the contribution of the Triggs family to the district in the days that they were at Old Linton?
Well, Mr. Triggs did a lot for the town. He was a generous man, and he gave greatly to everything, anything and everything.
How important do you think this place was for those men who'd come back from the war to try and...
It was a lifesaver, an absolute lifesaver, because it was a clear, fresh country air. There weren't very many rules. One was, the only important rule, that Don Noble was the manager here, one important rule he kept was they were not allowed to cross the bridge down here, because then they went to the pub. And a lot of them were reformed alcoholics, and they didn't approve of that. So if they did it twice, they were sent back to Sydney.
It was massive. It was one of the kindest gifts that was ever made, really. As June says, those people were shattered, and this was a mansion. It was a place that they called home. It felt like a home.
So this place brought a lot of peace to some really broken people.
Yes. And they were very happy here. It was very sad because a lot of them were young, brilliant young men, and they were shell-shocked. And, it was pathetic, it really was. Anyhow, they improved, and we went back to Sydney eventually.
What would you like to see happen to this beautiful old homestead?
I'd just like to see it looked after and loved.
Would you like to see it a museum or in
I think that's what Mr. Triggs would have liked. An idea, but it's got to be somebody with a lot of money. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of work that we'll need doing. It's rather sad because it's gone out of public knowledge now. I mean, it's just owned privately, and if you were to talk to a lot of the local people now, the new ones, they wouldn't know what you're talking about. It's only old people like us who remember.